Geek Out!
Wow, this interview, this is a special interview for starters. And it's special not just in terms of its release. If you want to jump on that Mech Cadet Yu Final Order cutoff, which is today, the day this thing posts. But it's also a special episode for me, and I think, when you listen to it, you kind of find out why. Because, I'm not like some tortured loner, but there isn't... The idea of half Koreans, just in general, working in whatever industry was something kind of foreign to me. And to see somebody whose both body of work, both in terms of breadth and quality, that just blew my mind. And the idea that here I am talking to him about his books. And that person is Greg Pak. And he's here to talk about Mech Cadet Yu. We also talk John Wick. We talk his Marvel work. It's a good time. Let's let him talk about it. And joining us this week, we have Greg Pak. He's writing the Image Comics. Fuck.
It's a crazy wave Image branching out, but yeah, they have a comic called Fuck.
Yeah,
it's called Fuck.
Yeah, I do the
with an ellipses.
Yeah, we'll re-record the intro, but Greg, I work for Image freelance, and so I'm always in Image mode. Okay.
That's totally fine. By the way, and my last name is actually pronounced Pak, which is not something many people really know, so no sweat. But yeah, it's actually Pak instead of Pak.
That makes me feel like kind of terrible because I'm half Korean too.
Oh, really, dude? Well, no, don't feel bad because there is actually, there are people whose name is pronounced that way, but my usually they're like they spell it Paik or something like that. Right. But mine's my grandfather came over in like 1938 and transliterated his name the way he wanted. So it's actually the same name that as Park,
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it's pronounced Pak.
Yeah, we're Kims ourselves from our side of the family. But
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well,
so good thing that we had to redo it.
Yeah.
I want to make sure it's pronounced all correct.
Of course. All right. And 3, 2. And joining us this week, we have Greg Pak, who's here promoting his Boom Studios comic book series, Mech Cadet Yu. The trade collecting the first 4 issues comes out in comic book stores in a Discover Now edition, out alongside issue 5, which kicks off the second arc on Wednesday, January 3rd. You can also, good God, you can read the prose copy of Planet Hulk that just came out. You can read the John Wick prequel comic done by Dynamite Comics. You can read the Big Trouble in Little China meets Escape from New York comic. And then, Greg, I don't know how many Marvel books you do these days.
Yeah, right now I'm actually working on 3. I'm working on the Incredible Hulk. We're doing a Return to Planet Hulk storyline right now, where Amadeus Cho, who is the current Hulk, is fighting an evil warlord on planet Sakaar. And then I'm writing Weapon X, which is a team of loners and killers, loners and semi-reformed villains, really, led by Old Man Logan. And in the current storyline, they're going up against a platoon of nukes, of soldiers who have the power of... I don't know if you remember Frank Simpson from the Born Again storyline back in the day. But
absolutely, yeah.
Classic Frank Miller, David Mazzucchelli character named Nuke. And then finally, it's just been announced I'm writing Weapon H, which features the ex-soldier turned Hulk Wolverine hybrid, who's now the star of his own book, and Corey Smith is drawing, and it's going to be a blast.
You've got the best. At the same time, it's not Bruce Banner or Jim Logan Howlett, but you've kind of got the best of both worlds, at least visually, with this new character.
Yeah. He's got, he's a big Hulk. He's like a big gray Hulk with Wolverine claws, and he also has these kind of crazy adamantium sort of bone things jutting from his shoulders. So he's a fun character. It's a big goofy premise, right? Mm-hmm. Which is fun, just a blast for comics. He's a soldier who was experimented on by the evil scientists in the Weapon X program. They were trying to create the most dangerous weapon they could, and how can you get more dangerous than having Hulk DNA and Wolverine DNA in the same dude? But the fun of it is that we've got a real emotional story to tell too about this ex-soldier who's been turned into a killing machine and now is, struggling with that, with being, this, with having been used in that kind of a way and finding his own path. So, it's just a ton of fun. I actually just had a big meeting with my editors about it yesterday. We're kind of figuring out the first and second arcs, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be big and fun and emotional and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, the whole emotional roller coaster ride. So with Mech Cadet Yu, you've kind of got the your team. I mean, it's a all age friendly kind of Voltron, Pacific Rim, scratches all that kind of like super Megazord itch. Where did the story kind of come from? Where were the seeds of inspiration with Mech Cadet Yu?
Yeah, well, years ago I made a movie called Robot Stories. I actually started off as a filmmaker. I went to NYU Film, made a bunch of short films, and then eventually made this movie, Robot Stories, which was an anthology picture with 4 stories basically about love, death, family, and robots. They were all kind of little sort of Twilight Zone-length stories. And so I had just robots on my mind for years. After I made that movie, I just had more of these stories kind of pop into my head, and this honestly was one of them. So this kind of is a story that's been in my head for like 15 years in some form or another. And I think it kind of started. I don't know exactly. I mean, I always loved stories with kids and giant robots. I also always loved stories like those whole Disney things they used to have on The Wonderful World of Disney. I'm dating myself now, but where like a kid would befriend a deer or something, you know what I mean, or befriend a kid with a bear or some kind of big animal. I don't know. I think there's always something really compelling about kids, like a kid paired with some kind of big monstrous thing or some big powerful friend. I think there's just something powerful about that. I think it's because, as a young person or as a kid, you just don't have that much strength or power in the world. And so the fantasy of having some huge friend who's going to be your buddy is really strong, So this notion of a kid paired up with a giant robot has always, kind of been in my head. And I at a certain point, I found myself thinking of like, what if, so there's a kid who meets this mysterious giant robot from outer space and he becomes his buddy and they bond. And but then what if more robots came? What would happen then? What if every year, every few years, more robots came down, mysterious robots, and bonded with kids? And my mind just started to spin, and it was like, well, the military would come in. They would set up they would cordon off the area. They would set up a military camp and a school. They would train kids to be the kids who go out there and bond with these robots, so that these robots can be brought into the military-industrial complex and not be just like rogue robots with kids floating around. Like and then okay, so you got that. So now you have this kind of cool military academy thing going. You got this story with these kids at this military academy, and then eventually, of course, there has to be some enemy. So there must be some monsters that they fight, right? The alien Sharg, So. Mm-hmm. But then, and I think it really kind of came together also when I was like just thinking about who our hero would be. And I just I'm always attracted to stories about underdogs. So the hero is Stanford Yu, and he's the janitor's kid at the school. He's the kid who's not a mech cadet. He's just, he's the help. He and his mom are janitors. And, so, he sees these kids who are part of this kind of amazing thing, and he kind of longs for it. He hears all the speeches given by the general at the orientation and all that, and he sees them with their giant robots and all of that, but he knows he can never be part of that. It's this kind of, terrible, so close but so far sort of experience. But then one day, one of these giant robots falls short of its destination, and he ends up bumping into Stanford and ends up bonding with Stanford. So the story becomes a story of this janitor's kid who joins the Mech Cadets, this unlikely underdog hero and his underdog robot, and how they and so it's kind of like Pacific Rim with a Harry Potter school in a Pacific Rim universe,
Oh, totally.
So I mean that's kind of the way it came. It was sort of like a lot of fun ideas. It's like you have one kind of crazy idea, and then you sort of take it to the next. You follow it along until you see what it becomes. It's been a huge amount of fun. Takeshi Miyazawa is the artist. He's the only the only person I ever thought of in terms of drawing it. I just love Tak so much. We've collaborated on many things over the years, and I knew he'd get it. And he's just drawing the heck out of it. He's amazing drawing young people and just regular people and making them totally compelling. He knows how to draw like civilian clothes. He knows how to draw like everyday people and yet make them totally come to life on the page. And he loves giant robots, so it's just perfect.
Match made in heaven, right there.
Yeah.
With with Tak, you guys created Amadeus Cho, and I remember those first because I was I'm going to date myself. I was just starting out like college when Amadeus showed up, and I remember just thinking he had the coolest look in those initial like backups with like the old army jacket and everything.
Oh yeah, that was all Tak. I mean, I think I may have specified he had an army jacket or whatever because we were doing a riff on Bruce Banner. Like Bruce Banner, roaming around, kind of on the run with an army jacket. Even back in the day, that's what we were kind of, that was sort of an inspiration there. But Tak did those first designs, and I was like, man, like I had nothing to say. I was just like, this is perfect. You know what I mean? I had no notes. He just nails it. He just gets it. He reads the description of the character, and then he just brings his own magic to it. The great thing about Tak is that, he understands the way every little aspect of a person's clothes and everything else informs the character. So he knows how that rumpled army jacket thing. Like he didn't put like a brand new out of the store clean and pressed army jacket on the kid. He gives it the right rumple, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's all those little details just mean so much. Even when Tak just does the little character designs, the character's just standing there. Mm-hmm. The character's just like in a moment. Like the character has a kind of an attitude. Like there's always something going on with that character where you look at it and you already get a feel for who that person is. I just love it.
Well, you mentioned you're attracted to writing stories about kind of underdog figures, and to take that a step further, it's also kind of outsider characters. You get that a bit with Stanford. You certainly get that with Bruce Banner, Cho, Logan, even Clark Kent, and certainly John Wick. What is it about those kind of outsider characters that intrigues you as a storyteller?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, I think that's a part of that is that like. I think most of us feel like outsiders at some point in our lives. Like everybody thinks everybody thinks they're different or an outsider. I think in a kind of funny way. You know what I mean? Like, and you look at not all, but you look at so many of the great characters in literature. And they're all a little weird. They're all a little on the margins, particularly when you look at kind of nerd culture or pop culture or whatever, Harry Potter, the X-Men, what are all the big franchises of the last few years? Like Peter Parker, look at all the Marvel characters, Parker, the Hulk, they're all on the margins, you got folks like, Tony Stark, I guess, or Stephen Strange. Stephen Strange was like the world's most brilliant surgeon. Yeah. Tony Stark was like, this brilliant industrialist. But then they're both like, arrogant jerks who have these terrible things happen to them and have these big comeuppances, right? So even they kind of get pushed, like they end up different, Stephen Strange, in his origin, he ends up like kind of roaming the world, like, on the margins, trying to find some kind of cure for his hands. But all of these characters end up, on the margins. But I think the ones I'm really, I think the ones I'm particularly attracted to are the ones who are sort of outside of the easy path to acclaim and fortune and riches. Like I was actually just thinking about this because I reread the Lloyd Alexander Prydain series, which probably the best known of those books is the Book of Three, or the Black Cauldron. Actually, is probably the best known one because they made a Disney movie out of it years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But and in a way, those were written by Lloyd Alexander in the '60s. They riffed on the same kind of myths that the Lord of the Rings riffed on. So, a lot of it is kind of familiar. It's swords and sorcery kind of stuff. But what I am, what struck me about those books as a kid and what really sticks with me now and what I still love is that they're about, the main character is this assistant pig keeper. He's an orphan who works for a wizard, basically, taking care of this oracular pig, this kind of pig that can kind of tell the future at certain times. But fundamentally, this kid's, he's an assistant pig keeper, and he's referred that way throughout the whole series. You know what I mean? And so he's kind of obsessed with finding out his, what his true heritage is or whatever. He hopes that he's, of royal birth or whatever. And I won't spoil it too much, but I will kind of spoil it. And that, the point of the books is that, one of the big kind of points of the book is that, royalty and royal blood are bullshit concepts. You know what I mean? It's
totally.
Can I say that or should I
you can you can curse up a storm by all means.
Okay,
we earn that ready on iTunes.
All right, cool. But that and I think that's a beautiful thing, particularly in a fantasy book like that. And I just on a personal level, I relate to that. I was I probably partly because I grew up as a half Asian kid and always I had a great childhood, but at the same time I always knew I was different. You know what I mean? And I grew up with a very strong sense that being different is a-okay and that's that individuality and is a great thing, and that folks should be able to everybody should have an equal shot at making the most of whatever they've got going on, and that things are earned rather than bestowed by blood. You know what I mean? All of that is
here's a thing, Greg, and this is, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up, and I've mentioned this to you in shows in passing before in New York and Baltimore. I don't know if you remember, but growing up, you grew up in Texas as a Korean American.
Yeah.
I grew up in Virginia as a Korean American kid, and so you would get adept at using the knife and fork, but at the chopsticks at the same time. So and you would always have a lot of starch. It would always either be potatoes or rice. But
sometimes both.
Sometimes both, totally. And the with always, and I'm sure you ran into this too. With my white friends, I was always the Asian kid, and with my Asian friends, I was always the white kid.
Oh yeah, yeah. And if I hung out with a bunch of Jewish friends, then folks would assume I'm Jewish. If I hang out with with a group of Latino folks, people think I'm Latino. You know what I mean? That is. There is that. That sense of.
Being different,
you definitely have. You realize you're different from everybody. You know what I mean? It's interesting because we've got that because of our ethnic background and all of that, and our biracial heritage and all that. But then there's but it's interesting because I really do think almost everybody feels like that for whatever reason. Everybody's got something going on. Otherwise, these characters like Harry Potter or whatever, if everybody was Malfoy, then we wouldn't read those books. You know what I mean? But and some people read those books and they're like, oh yeah, I'm Malfoy, this is awesome. But most people are reading it and they're thinking I'm Harry or I'm Hermione. You know what I mean? Or I'm one of these, underdog characters. That's who we identify with. Probably the most popular kid in school still, feels like underdog in some weird way. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, when you were writing, you wrote for our listeners at home. You wrote Action Comics for a pretty big stint. You've got
Superman the Doomed arc being one of the best arcs
in the New 50.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
and the Superman Batman stuff too.
Yeah.
Speaking of army jackets.
Yeah, right.
But with Superman with Clark, kind of similar to our own upbringing. He's a kid of two worlds,
Yep.
part of both, but a full member of neither. Did that kind of inform Clark?
Oh
when
yeah.
you write?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, Clark is one of those. I mean, there's a handful of characters over the years that I just feel like I've gotten from the get-go. You know what I mean? And it's not through any special, credit. It's not credit to me. It's just that whatever, there's something about, the way I grew up or whatever experiences I've had that make them immediately understandable to me. And Clark Kent is one of those. I mean, he's of two cultures or two different. He's got a multi, a mixed background, so to speak. He's got also he's like he's a kid from Smallville who moves to the big city, who goes to Metropolis. You know what I mean? And I'm like the kid from Dallas who ends up in New York. I mean, like there's also like I was a Boy Scout and all that kind of stuff, and
Sure.
and that whole that whole thing of Clark always. I feel like Clark, he just has this very strong sense that he needs to try to do the right thing all the time. And that's very compelling to me. And what becomes really compelling about it, I think, is when you tell stories where it's not always clear what the right thing is. You tell stories with those shades of gray and see how he can struggle to make his way through it and let him make mistakes and then figure out, and deal with those consequences. I think those are great kind of stories to tell with Clark. But yeah, I mean, the fact that he's, he is, one of those characters who people don't quite, most people don't see him, don't really know him fully. I mean, Bruce Banner's also like that. Bruce Banner's got this, like he's set apart from folks. He's got, part of it is both these guys have huge secrets, of course.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I am curious. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. You wrote Planet Hulk, obviously the runaway character, even though he's maybe not as necessarily as you originally envisioned him, is a stone man by the name of Korg. How does it feel seeing so much from Planet, like the proud papa moment, lifted from Planet Hulk, and of course getting the chance to write the prose adaptation this year too? How's that all kind of been?
It's been amazing. I mean, and I want to, definitely plug all my co-creators on Planet Hulk. I mean, Carlo Pagulayan and Aaron Lopresti were the main artists on that book, and none of that would have worked. I mean, it's all of our baby. Mark Paniccia was my, chief, partner in crime. He was the editor on the book, and Nate Cosby was another editor. Was the assistant editor, and it was just I mean that whole thing was just a tremendous experience. Chris Sotomayor was the colorist. It was everybody was. I think we all felt that it was something special when we were working on it, and just loved it, and also really just felt how special it was to have the space to build that world and build all those characters. It's very rare that you start a comic book series knowing you've got. Knowing for sure that you've got this huge canvas to work on. We knew from the beginning that we had 14 issues. That was approved from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And that's rare. Like usually in comics, you're approved for maybe 4 issues or maybe 6 issues,
Especially
and then
these days,
we'll see how it goes. Yeah, exactly.
That's how Mech Cadet Yu started.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. Because the market is, it's a tough market, right? So I mean, with Mech Cadet Yu, I've got a plan for a big 12-issue arc, the big main story. So knock on wood, we'll be able to do all of that. But then I had to have another plan for how will it work if we only get 4 issues, and then thankfully folks went nuts and really came through with it. Readers and everybody. So we're hugely grateful. Oh, but about, Korg. So with Planet Hulk, so this Korg character and all these other characters we got to create, we fell in love with them. And in the Planet Hulk story, it was this kind of big epic where the Hulk collects all these, he bonds with all these gladiators, and they become the war bound, and they fight together, and they win their freedom together, and then they free all the others, all these other folks in this world together, and they build this community, So, I mean, it's this huge revelatory experience for the Hulk, where this guy who just wants to be left alone suddenly finds himself bonded with, first half a dozen and then a whole huge community of people, which is tremendous. It's a huge emotional thing for him and for all those characters. So and Korg is kind of the heart and soul of that group. He's the he's the big rock man, and he's the rock in the group. And he's this kind of solemn. I mean, he's this kind of how do you put it? He's this solemn warrior but he does have a wry sense of humor in the Planet Hulk book. But yeah, in the movie, he's much funnier. But I love the movie. It's probably my favorite Marvel movie. Maybe I think at this point it probably is my favorite of the Marvel movies. Of course, I'm wildly biased, but no, I mean it's that amazing combination of really fun humor and real emotion and just tremendously fun action. But folks have asked me like, are you bummed that they took this kind of serious, heroic tragedy that you wrote with Planet Hulk and turned it into and did this kind of comic thing? And I'm like, no, not at all. Because, well, first, it just works. I mean, it's a great movie. And secondly, because, the core of that character is really still there. You know what I mean? It's the same. It's just, he's still this big rock man with a heart of gold. He's just played a lot more goofy, but it totally works. And I'm 100% with it, I just loved it. I loved every minute of it. I also kind of have this sense that in comics all the time, we take previous stories and these characters and we do a different take on them. And the hope is that we're always like finding some core, there's some core of the character that still shines through. But those characters, if they're really great, you can play with them in a million different ways. Look at Batman. Look how many different versions of Batman there are, and they're all great. And I think this is, I feel like it's an exciting thing to see that, some character that I had a hand in creating can be played with in the same way.
One of the things I think we should also really touch on, you've just launched the John Wick series over with Dynamite.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering how that whole experience kind of came about and what it's like getting, and how much leeway you've got from like Lionsgate, but getting into John Wick, the Baba Yaga's head, the boogeyman that you send to kill the fucking boogeyman.
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, how's that experience been?
It's been great.
I know you're a huge Keanu fan.
What's that?
I know you're big on Keanu.
Oh, yes, exactly. So, yeah, there were a couple of things that came together with that. I mean, actually, we were just talking about Planet Hulk. Nate Cosby was the assistant editor on Planet Hulk back in the day. He eventually left Marvel and started working for other companies, and he's done a lot of work for Dynamite. So at some point, Dynamite was, they'd gotten the John Wick franchise. I'd actually heard about the fact that they got the John Wick franchise, and I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. And then Nate called me up, and he was like, hey, actually, I don't know if he called me up. I periodically I'd just been tweeting about Keanu, you know what I mean? Because I think he's awesome. Somebody asked me like, who would I want to play me in a biopic of me, and I was like, of course, Keanu Reeves. Like the greatest Hapa actor on the planet. What other multiracial Asian actors are there who would be so awesome? Anyway, but I've loved Keanu over the years, and I joke, I had this running joke of always retweet Keanu on Twitter. You know what I mean? I stole that from somebody. I saw somebody do that once, and I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. So whenever a picture of Keanu floats across my timeline, I always retweet it, and I just tag it, always retweet Keanu. And so I think Nate had seen that, so he knew I dug Keanu. And then I can't remember if he called me first or if he just told the Dynamite guys to call me, but somebody called me up and they were like, hey, would you be interested in doing this John Wick book? And I was like, yes, obviously. And it all worked out, so it's been a kick in the pants. The movies are they're already legendary, right? I mean, they came out of nowhere and they did what nobody does. They became it had so much style and freshness and fun that and kind of like really subtle world building, you know what I mean? Like they did this, they created this kind of fun world that you want to learn about, and they only teased a little bit of it at a time in just a really smart way. and they did what nobody else did, which is that they became a franchise. Like who? I mean, it's very rare these days for an original movie that's not based on something that came before to take off like this, and so much of that, I mean, huge credit to the directors and to writer Derek Kolstad, who's amazing, and to Keanu himself. I don't think these movies could have worked with, it's hard to imagine any other actor making it work. Partly because I think a huge reason these movies work also is because they've got an actor who can do all of this, who can, I mean, he's like a dancer, you know what I mean? Like he can execute all these incredible action moves. He can make that action sing. And there's only a handful of people on the planet, I think, who can really do that well, in this specific way for this kind of movie. So they're a tremendous accomplishment, and they really felt like they were ripe for comics. They felt like they could really work in comics. The trick was, finding out what kind of story we could do, because, like part of the charm is that we don't know a whole lot, and we're always want to know more. And so how much could we reveal? I mean, and what kind of story could we tell that would feel relevant, and not just kind of like treading water in between movies or something. But then they told me, well, Lionsgate has suggested, telling a prequel story, something that happened before the movies. And I was like, whoa, you mean like, we actually have some leave to do to dig into that uncharted territory. So, I did an outline, and we, submitted it, got some notes, and went back and forth. I got to get on the phone with Derek, and we had a great conversation, and it's been a blast, and Giovanni Valletta came on, is the artist, and he's tremendous. So it's the book's been, it's very exciting to have it out in the world.
It's I used to work at a Blockbuster years and years ago, and one of the things I'd always do when I ran out of like ideas for free rentals, because we had so many, was I'd pick an actor and like watch their entire catalog. And like Keanu Reeves, it's like Kurt Russell and Keanu Reeves were two of my favorites.
Oh, we haven't even mentioned Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh, I know. Oh yeah, we'll get there. But no, I wanted to hang on Keanu for a second, because like I went through, and Keanu, I think for like a lot of people I think before John Wick, had that kind of like, it was like the Matrix and like, the Bill and Ted stuff, which is great, but like every Keanu impression isn't an impression of Keanu Reeves. It's an impression, from the Bill and Ted movies, like, Surfer Bro. But like one of the things that I think you kind of touched on it with like, him playing John Wick. And I think the reason people love Keanu Reeves so much is like, he's so genuine, like with all of the movies he does, and it's not about, the big, huge performance with Keanu Reeves. And like, it also, I think he takes the role so seriously. I don't know if you've seen the training videos that went around. They went like viral.
Oh yeah.
For him with John Wick. I mean, like that guy's a fucking stone cold killer, like in real life, man. Like, but like, yeah, I think it just, there's something about Keanu Reeves that's it's hard to explain. But like, I think when you watch a lot of his movies, you just, I don't know. He, like you said, there's that stoicness that works so well with John Wick. And when you
I love him because I mean, I genuinely love him as a performer. I've never met him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my not so secret hope is that by doing these comics, eventually I'll actually meet him.
Yeah,
which would be cool. But
definitely.
No, but I love how earnest he is.
Yeah,
he's totally not ironic. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, and I think that's huge. Like there's, I think we live in a world that's packed full of irony and of distance, and people trying to be cool, and trying to sort of be above something, or separate themselves from something. And I think Keanu is he's just in there doing it. You know what I mean? Like he's in, and it's like you say, he's he's totally committed, and I love that, and I think that's, I think there's but yeah, I mean, that's very compelling to me.
Well, I love there's that story too that I heard about him where it was like his birthday and he was like at a cafe outside by himself, and like a fan walked by and saw him and was like, "Oh, happy birthday." And he's like, "Do you want to sit down and have cake?" and like just had cake with Keanu Reeves.
I like your little Keanu impression there. That was actually really pretty good.
But the line that I always use to like do a Keanu impression is from The Day the Earth Stood Still, where he does what's the line? He goes, "If the Earth dies, you die." If the Earth survives. No, what is it? Oh, okay, I got it.
Yeah. Get into it.
If you die, the Earth survives. If the Earth dies, you die. Which is like, he's perfect in that movie too.
See,
like,
I always go to Dracula.
Oh yeah.
I
say, is the castle fall? But like you said too, with John Wick, is like I think 99.9% of every other actor on the planet would have played it that one way, and he was the only guy who was going to play it a totally different way. Like he doesn't go for like because there's that one moment he spills over with rage, towards the end.
I'm thinking,
I'm thinking I'm back. You're like, oh fuck yeah, like, but he's so kind of like he plays it like and it's going to sound weird, but I love it. Is like he plays it kind of so sad, early on, like he's not, and like that I think it's compelling with any kind of action character, just characters in general, being like just totally pulled back into it, and like he slowly gets back into it, and like when he finally lets loose, I mean he's doing headshots left and right, like to the extreme, but it's just he looks at roles totally differently, and seems like a genuinely nice guy, like a really nice guy.
I mean the fact that I've worked with the Dynamite people before, and I think they're great. And Nate, I'm always happy. I love Nate. So when they call me and offer me something, I'm always going to be interested. But yeah, when it was a Keanu related project, I was not going to say no. I mean, it was going to happen. It was going to happen.
Maybe they'll get the Replacements license.
Oh,
next.
The Replacements.
That movie is great.
Yeah.
Oh, I enjoy it. Every time it's on, and I feel like it's on at the gym, like at least once a week. I'm like TNT's just showing it. I'm like, we can stay another like hour and a half.
Well, it's like basically based off the Redskins. The Washington Redskins, like their whole strike thing and whatnot.
Oh, really?
Us being DC.
Well, it is kind of funny because I shouldn't love it so much because it's basically about scabs, which I'm actually against. But it's a lot of fun. The movie. It's also about football, and I don't watch football because of the head injury stuff. I just it just feels wrong to me. You know what I mean? Like the way not to sports political, but the way the league has dealt with with concussions is unacceptable.
The league has maybe not handled a lot of things.
Yeah.
Indeed.
But that movie is ridiculously fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good
all
time.
Keanu. Well, we just turned into a Keanu podcast. I'm fine with
Yeah,
that.
We'll do a Keanu
exactly.
show.
Yeah.
But
we haven't talked about Speed. Like the turning point. For Keanu fans. Where it's like, oh, all right, we're gonna do this now.
That and Point Break. Those were the 1-2 punch.
Oh, Point Break.
Yeah. Point Break was first, right?
Yes, it was. Catherine Bigelow joint. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. I'll confess, I've never seen Point Break.
Oh wow.
I want to see part. I know. I use the GIF all the time of him giving the thumbs up, but I've never seen the movie.
That's an exclusive.
Well, you will enjoy the hell out of it when you finally watch it because there's some just prime time Keanu Reeves in there.
Now, Greg, something we ask everybody that comes on the show: what are you currently geeking out over?
Well, I just reread that Lloyd Alexander Purdain series, and yes, I know this is a 55-year-old series, but I'm over the. I kind of can't stop thinking about it. It's really amazing. I highly recommend it. If you love Lord of the Rings, do yourself a favor and read this Lloyd Alexander Purdain series. It's a kid's book. It's a young series of young adult novels, basically. But they really hold up, and they're just kind of tremendous. Kind of also. I mean, we were just talking about how much I appreciate Keanu's lack of irony and earnestness, and just honesty. And I think these books are kind of like that. They kind of are. They wear their heart on their sleeves in a good way. So that's one of the things I'm geeking out big about these days.
Anything else? And we've certainly mentioned Ragnarok, but anything in film, anything in music or TV?
Sadly, I have not been. I don't see much movies or TV because I'm I'm writing so much. I'm writing 6 books a month these days, which is a little crazy. Yeah, I mean it's a little. I mean I actually just turned in the last issue of something I've been working on, so that kind of eases things up a bit. But yeah, no, it's been a pretty busy time. I think the last bit of music that kind of blew my mind has been I got the new Ray Wylie Hubbard album.
Oh wow!
And it's this kind of Ray Wylie Hubbard is this kind of old school kind of country blues legend, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, he's like a kind of Willie Nelson contemporary who's kind of just as awesome, but folks, but didn't quite break through to the mainstream in the same way, but is just tremendous. But he's got this new album called, hang on, let me just, I forget the name off the top of my head, but it's this kind of, it's basically like Bible. It's like him kind of digging into Bible themes in a from his own, kind of particular quirky angle. And he's got this song called "God Looked Around," and I heard it on the radio when I was driving down to the Baltimore Comic-Con. I was like passing, I guess Baltimore. It was like I was passing Princeton, and it was like Princeton University radio, and some dude was just doing this kind of crazy country blues show, and he played this Ray Wylie Hubbard song "God Looked Around," which is this like retelling of Genesis, but in this kind of folksy country blues style, and it's just amazing. It's just like really weird and quirky, and it's got, I don't know, his voice. He's got such a this gravelly voice that's so specific, and it's amazing. So anyway, that's my musical geek out for now. Ray Wylie Hubbard.
Right on, man. Well, Greg, before we let you go, is there anything else that you'd like to plug?
Let me just plug Mech Cadet Yu again, because we talked about it, but just to reiterate, the first story arc is 4 issues long, and that is coming out in a collected form just to comic book stores on, what was the date we decided that was? January 3rd.
January 3rd, alongside issue 5.
January 3rd, yes, and issue 5 comes out at the same time. So originally this was going to be a 4-issue mini, but now it's an ongoing, and so you can catch up with everything on January 3rd. By getting that comic shop exclusive volume. Oh yeah, and I can break a little bit of news. That comic shop exclusive volume will also include a 10-page story that Tak and I did. That is the story that eventually became Mech Cadet Yu. It was called Los Robos, and it was a story we did for a anthology book of Asian American comics called Secret. Actually, it's called Shattered, the Asian American Comics Anthology, and so. That 10-page story, that rarely seen 10-page story with coloring by the great Jessica Colleen, is part of is going to be collected in this in the trade with the first 4 issues. So you don't want to miss that.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean the book's been a huge amount of fun. It's I shouldn't say it, but I will say it. It's my favorite baby right now. So please do come and check it out. Actually, my big plea to anybody listening is to call your local comic shop, and ask them to pre-order it for you, because pre-orders are solid gold for us. That's what determines how many books end up getting printed, and if a book gets a lot of pre-orders, then it gets to stick around for a while. So. Huge thanks to everybody who's been reading it, and huge thanks to everybody who considers picking it up.
And we'll have this up, by FOC, so you can.
Oh, super cool. Oh yeah, and let me plug the rest of the team. Simon Boland is the letterer. Cameron Chittock and Eric Harburn are the editors, and Triona Farrell is the colorist. And it's been an amazing team. It's the whole, every once in a while you get on a book and everybody involved just, it's like Planet Hulk. Everybody just is kind of on the same page in a beautiful way, literally on the same page in the comic book. But everybody's kind of pulling in the same direction and really, feels what everybody else is doing. And it's just been one of those projects that feels like it's got a little special sun on it. So I hope you enjoy it.
Right on, man. Well, and before we release you back into the wilds of New York City, Greg, I do have to say, again, as a fellow Southern half Asianer, I had read comics in the 90s, and I had kind of gotten out of them, and back in right around the time that your Hulk run was picking up steam is when, and I think you were doing Phoenix Endsong around the same time.
Oh yeah.
I was starting. Yeah, it was really cool. I was starting to get back into comics, and the idea of another half Korean person, because you don't really see that many of us. And honestly, that was a big deal, man. Like, and I work freelance for Image now, and honestly, a lot of that, not to get my nose brown, comes from you. You were definitely somebody I looked up to, like in the industry. It means a lot.
Honestly, that means a lot to me. That really does. When I was coming up, I was looking around, and folks like Wayne Wang and Peter Wang were huge to me, because these were filmmakers who were making Asian American movies with Asian Americans in them. And I grew up at a time when. Margaret Cho jokes about this, but it's totally true. Like, if there was an Asian person on TV, I'd yell, "Asian person!" Like, we'd all run and look. I'm like, "Oh my God, there's an Asian person on TV! I can't believe it!" And typically it was going to be some.
It was always Sulu.
Yeah, exactly. or it was some like embarrassing stereotypical thing. And I remember the first time I saw this movie, A Great Wall, directed by Peter Wang, and it was about this Chinese American family that goes to China, like the father. Quits his job. He hits the bamboo ceiling and quits his job and takes his family on a trip to China to meet their relatives and everything. And but it was the first time I'd seen just a regular, non-stereotypical American family, Chinese American family, in any form, in any form of media. And it was revelatory to me. It was such a big deal. And then I saw Chan is Missing, but Wayne Wang's movie, and then and years later I actually bumped into Wayne Wang like in a park in New York City, and I was like, and I told him, like, you were a huge. It was really, really important to me to see, to see your movies and just to know you existed. So thank you. But it blows my mind that anybody would have that would have seen my stuff and felt something similar. So I'm really grateful to hear that, and that means the world to me. So thank you.
Oh, no problem at all, man. And again, Mech Cadet Yu. Out in comic book stores, the trade, exclusively comic book stores, you can get the trade in a larger version of the trade in May. But if you want that early access along with issue 5, January 3rd, again, check out John Wick, check out The Incredible Hulk, check out the Big Trouble in Little China and Escape from New York crossover is available in comic book stores and on Comixology. And then Weapon X.
Weapon X and Weapon H. Yeah, I got the 2 weapon books at Marvel.
Yeah.
Get them both, get the whole alphabet.
Could you ever, I feel like if there's anybody at Marvel right now that should do like a Shang-Chi book. Have you ever pitched a Shang-Chi book?
No, I haven't actually. And honestly, I'll be totally honest with you. I kind of avoided it for a while because I didn't want to, I have, in my own work, I've avoided martial arts stories with Asian dudes in it, just because that's what I grew up seeing all the time, and sort of like that was one of the stereotypes that would get thrown at me when I was a kid that I didn't particularly appreciate, which is sad because
I love Bruce Lee.
What's that?
I love Bruce Lee.
Yeah, exactly. I'm looking right now at a picture of Bruce Lee hanging in my office. So yeah, I love Bruce Lee, and in the 90s I discovered all those 90s, those incredible 90s Hong Kong action movies, martial arts movies, and I grew up in just loving Toshiro Mifune and Akira Kurosawa movies and all that kind of stuff. But there was something in me that resisted telling stories with those kinds of characters for years. But I got a chance to write Shang-Chi for the first time in the Totally Awesome Hulk book. When we in issue number 15, I teamed up. We did a thing where Amadeus teamed up with a bunch of other Asian American superheroes. They actually go and they get Korean barbecue and do karaoke in New York. That's literally one of the funnest issues I've ever written in my whole life. But writing Shang-Chi was a total blast. I actually love Shang-Chi. So Who knows? Maybe someday.
Maybe someday, man. Well, Greg, thanks again for coming on, and again, those books are out, and you can get Mech Cadet Yu Volume 1 on January 3rd. Greg,
thanks a million, you guys. You guys are a blast. Really appreciate it.
This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday, and you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.